want grapes? Thank you. The reason I jumped in the surf, and you are all going to be beneficiaries, I did jump in the surf on New Year's Eve at sunset at right near Point Doom, and I had my 24-year-old daughter with me. And the occasion was that I turned 70. So I went, and believe me, the Pacific Ocean is cold. I do it every 10th year. When I turn 50, 60, 70, I jump in the ocean. So I have decided when I turn 80, I will be in Costa Rica. So it's wonderful that you're all here. I have family here. The father of my son-in-law is here, Joe Statman. We are migrating to Valley Village. I have 2 grandsons in Valley Village, and it's wonderful to be coming out here. But we do have some unfinished business back east. Also, by the way, speaking of unfinished business, Linda Seeley is here from Diablo Canyon. And towards the end of our presentation, we will give her a couple of minutes to talk about shutting the nuclear power plant at Diablo Canyon. I had the good experience of being arrested at Diablo Canyon in 1984. I spent 3 nights in the San Luis Obispo County Jail, which I highly recommend, and those of you who want to take a bus up there afterwards, I'm sure we can arrange accommodations. So, but there's some really good developments with the shutdown of Diablo Canyon imminent, we hope. We have succeeded, and we've had events here at Mimi's house in shutting down the San Onofre reactors, which is a huge victory for all of us. So, and before I go further, I want to thank Mimi for doing this. This is a tremendous undertaking, having everybody come here. I know she's put in fantastic work. And Larry and Mimi have really put themselves out, and it's a tremendous thing. And
we both put out.
Yes, that too.
Harvey is a hippie. It's terrible. I reverse.
And we do have a cake in the back to celebrate my birthday. Unfortunately, it does not contain any of that medicinal weed that we all so loved, but you will be able to drive home, so that's the good news. So feel free afterwards. We'll cut into the cake. Okay, so here's the deal. History is full of amazing accidents. I'm going to set my timer here, and Ann Doneen of the wonderful Santa Monica Democrats Malibu Democrats will take, and we're happy to have you here too, please. So for many, many years when I grew up, I was born in Boston, but I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and I always wondered what the fuck I was doing in Columbus, Ohio. It just made no sense that I was there, and it all came together in 2004. I teach at a community college and at a Lutheran school. I teach U.S. history, and I have a co-conspirator named Bob Petrakis, who's a professor of political science.
Yay, Bob!
And in the lead up to 2004, having experienced the theft of the 2000 election, for which knowledge of which we're greatly thankful to Greg Palast, only 2 people really covered the theft of that election, Greg and Bev Harris. Yep. And had there not been for Greg and Bev Harris, nobody would have known anything about the theft of the 2004 election, really. Least of all Al Gore, who's done absolutely nothing about it, as John Kerry at least knew about it and didn't do anything in 2004. So what we saw in 2004 was the progression of the theft of a presidential election, which is interesting to me. I've been writing U.S. history books all my life. I'm doing another one about cycles of history, and this to know that the election was being stolen in my hometown was pretty amazing. And so in the lead up to that election, many of you may have read some of our stuff. We did discover, for example, that the owner of the voting machines on which the majority of the votes were cast in Ohio in 2004 was a Bush fundraiser, and sent out a letter in 2003 guaranteeing that Bush would win the election. Wally Odell, this is the owner of Diebold. Small detail. And then some other small detail, the Secretary of State of the state of Ohio who runs the elections was the co-chair of the committee to re-elect Bush Cheney, following the footsteps of Katherine Harris in Florida, who had the same role when she was Secretary of State in Florida. And so I want to preamble this by saying that there are 6 key swing states in the United States going into the 2016 election where you have the governor and the Secretary of State who are both Republicans. And that would be Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, Iowa, and Arizona. Now you tell me how in hell anybody but a Republican is going to win the 2016 presidential election, especially given the fact that 80% of the votes in the United States now in 2016 will be cast on electronic voting machines. Now, Mimi mentioned the HAVA, the Help America Vote Act. The response of the Congress to the theft of the 2000 election, where electronic voting machines played a key role in Volusia County, where you had a slight glitch of 16,000 votes in an election that was decided by less than 600, as you'll recall. There was a swing of 16,000 votes electronically in Volusia County, which were somewhat sort of maybe given back to Al Gore, we don't know, but in the course of the evening, with George W. Bush's cousin at Fox News calling the election, they used these 16,000 electronically swung votes to change the whole narrative of the election, which Al Gore was winning and then suddenly was not. And our entire history, the whole Iraq War, the whole nightmare with Katrina, everything that George W. Bush did was based on the theft, the swing of those 16,000 votes, and the disenfranchisement of so many voters, as Greg will tell you, and that was what Greg broke at the time. The only good thing you can say about George W. Bush is that we never elected him president of the United States. And so we viewed it, Bob and I documented it in Ohio in 2004, and I got to say that, it's terrifying to me as one of the two guys that did it, that if it hadn't been for the two of us there and the internet and the freepress.org, nobody would have heard about it. Nobody was covering it. Nobody took us seriously. We were actually thrown off Daily Kos. We have been blacklisted by Daily Kos because we suggested that the Romney family's ownership of the voting machines in Cincinnati might have an impact on the election. They thought that was conspiracy theory, and, if you want to hear conspiracy theory that is actually true, to ask me about the sinking of the Maine, the sinking of the Lusitania, the start of the Vietnam War, and the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So, there are plenty of conspiracies in American history that are more than true, including all the wars of the 20th century. So what we are now doing, we documented in 100 different ways how the election was stolen in Ohio 2004. And it came to me. I sat down one day. We had written 5 or 6 books already, and I wanted to do a digest. And so I did a digest. I have a copy out in the front called How the GOP Stole America's 2004 Election. And the modus was, which we're going to repeat now for 2016 in the lead-up, was I would do one paragraph, a bullet point, on each way that they stole it. For example, in Toledo, they used... You got to credit them with a sense of humor. They gave the voters pencils to mark on the Scantrons that could not be read by the Scantron readers. That, we like that, right? Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think you mentioned that we went to the National Press Club where we had books there and that nobody.
That's right. We did go to the National Press Club. We had a presentation of this, and nobody covered it. Everybody was there. Nobody covered it. Right, and this is Eileen Proctor, and she brought the media there. So I was typing this digest about how they stole the election, and I would have to get up time after time and throw things. I mean, it's astounding what they did. They shortchanged the voting machines in Central Ohio. They mailed out absentee ballots that did not have Kerry's name on it. Chutzpah, but they did it, and they locked up in one of the biggest precincts in Ohio. They locked up the votes just at the closing time, claiming there was a Homeland Security alert. They never explained it, and Bush emerged with 14,000 more votes from that precinct, that area, in 2004 than he did 2000. Mimi mentioned down ballot things. We had Kerry, way behind a Supreme Court, Ohio Supreme Court candidate in an all-white county, and she was black. She came out ahead of Kerry in this county, things that were absolutely impossible. And I will tell you to summarize, because we're looking at 2016. In 2004, there were 11 swing states, key swing states, that everybody knew would swing the election. And at 12:20 at night, thankfully, somebody got a screenshot of the CNN accounting of where the election was going. And you had Colorado and Florida being led by Bush, and he won in Colorado and Florida. You had the other 9 swing states, all were in the Kerry column, right, at 12:20 at night. At 2 o'clock in the morning, every one of those states except Wisconsin. Wisconsin stayed constant. Kerry won by 0.4% as of 12:20, and he actually wound up winning, and they had a Democratic Secretary of State, La Follette. But all the other swing states, every one of them, had massive shifts and statistically impossible shifts from Kerry to Bush. And 4 of those states morphed from Kerry to Bush, and that's how Bush was reelected. And they were Iowa, New Mexico, Nevada, and Ohio. In Ohio, Kerry was leading as of 12:20 at night by 4.2%, well over 200,000 votes. There are 5.5 million voters in Ohio. In the morning, he lost Ohio by 2.2%, a shift of 6.7%, absolutely statistically virtually impossible. And the shift of every one of those states, all 10 of the 11, from Kerry to Bush is in the trillions. The odds against it talk about a horse race. Yeah. Talk about the track conditions. Yeah. Is in the trillions. It could not have happened with actual voting. It had to have been done electronically. Okay? Now we know when and how it was done in Ohio. J. Kenneth Blackwell, the Secretary of State, the co-chair of the Bush-Cheney re-election campaign, gave a no-bid contract for the counting of votes to a company called TrueVote. It wasn't TrueVote. I'm sorry, SmartTech, whose head was Michael Connell, a Bush consigliere, for those who've seen The Godfather. And he was their IT guy. And all the votes the counting of the votes was supervised by SmartTech in the basement of the old Pioneer Bank building in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And at 12:20 at night, suddenly there was an announcement. There were problems with the machines, and the flow of results stopped, with Kerry ahead 4.5%. When the flow re-emerged, 4.2%. When the flow re-emerged at 2 o'clock in the morning, Bush miraculously emerged with a 2.5% victory. We know exactly how it was done. We finally and talk about accountability, which Mimi was talking about. During the course of the election, or in the lead up to the election, I love it, they denied me an absentee ballot. I've lived in the same house and voted in the same precinct since the late 1980s. I called them 4 times. I said, what gives? They said, well, you're not registered. I said, I am registered. Finally, I used the magic words, I'm with the media. And I got my absentee ballot. But we sued. There was a lawsuit, the King, Lincoln, Bronzeville federal lawsuit, to demand a hand-counted recount of the 88 counties in Ohio. And we won. And Judge Algernon Marbley, couldn't make that name up, ordered the 88 counties to deliver all election materials to a central repository in Columbus. We wound up with a Democratic Secretary of State, Jennifer Brunner. She set up a repository. Everything was ready. 56 of the 88 counties announced that they had no materials to send to the repository. There has never been a recount of the 2004 voting in Ohio that gave George W. Bush a second term. Now, why is that so significant? That's ancient history, blah, blah, blah. First of all, we told this to the Democrats. The Democrats have been absolutely hostile. But I am a Green, by the way. I am nonpartisan. I don't, my concern ultimately is that it's not that the Democrats will steal from the Republicans and the Republicans will steal from the Democrats. It's the Democrats and the Republicans will shut us out when we finally get, which is what they did to Eugene V. Debs, the great socialist who continually ran for president, never got more than 1 billion votes, even though he was the most popular and most loved public figure in America for 20 years. When Eugene V. Debs ran for Congress in 1916 from his hometown of Terre Haute, Indiana, where everybody knew him and everybody loved him, he ran for Congress. Guess how many votes he got? None. Nobody apparently voted for Eugene V. Debs for Congress in Terre Haute, Indiana in 1916. Talking about chutzpah. So what we're doing now is we are leading in to a rerun. Now, in 2008 and 2012, there are all sorts of reasons why Barack Obama actually got the president, one of which, the main one, is meetings like this. People did get together. They did understand, because of Greg's reporting and so on, they did understand what was about to happen. And also, Obama won by well over 10 million votes. He wound up with officially about 7, but he was in the 13 to 15 million range. and they just slashed it and burned it wherever they could, but they couldn't go far enough. Yes, different. Well, there were other Jennifer Brunner, and there were other conditions that allowed, and people were fired up for Barack Obama, right? Now they'll be fired up for Bernie Sanders if he gets the nomination, but I'm not sure how fired up they'll be for Hillary Clinton. But nonetheless, you have to have. That's the point. You have to have an army out there that's going to watch these voting process, and because of HAVA. The response to the theft of the election of 2000 was to make it easier to steal the upcoming elections, essentially. And the guy who, you'll love to know that the guy who sponsored HAVA, Bob Ney, wound up in prison for favoritism. But there wasn't a mainstream article about this done by the Brennan Center that they pointed out the voting machines that were brought in under HAVA in 2002 to 2004 and 6 are now more than 10 years old. Anybody using a 10-year-old computer out there? So not only are very good. Not only are all these machines hackable, but they're really ancient. You can actually flip an election in a precinct by driving by and using Wi-Fi. So where do we stand in 2016? What's that? In LA as well. So Bob and I are just in the process of finishing up a book called The Sixth Jim Crow, and then the subtitle is the Electronic Election Theft and the Strip Flip selection of 2016. We call it strip and flip because you strip the voter rolls, and Greg will talk about this. They've already stripped hundreds of thousands of people off the voter rolls, and the machines are not colorblind, by the way. And then they flip it if they can't get enough people off the voter rolls to win. Then they deep in the night they take out the 10 seconds that's necessary to electronically flip the election, and they do that. And it's an unbeatable combination unless we do something about it. So we're going in now, this book, and we're going to include Mimi's speech and an article from Greg in this upcoming book. We're going to lay out the history of racial segregation of the voting process, and we're going to talk then about the new Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander's amazing book, which is, of course, The Drug War. 41 million arrests in the United States from 1970 to 2015, allegedly on drugs, half of them for pot, 50% or more of black and Hispanic. 41 million arrests. There are 150 countries in the world that don't have 41 million people in them. And that's how many people were arrested in the drug war. It has always been a race war. The drug war has always been about race. It's always been about the Republican Party locking up the South. It's a disenfranchisement vote. Nothing to do with drugs. Nothing to do with the public health. If it wasn't for the drug war, they'd have found another pretext for arresting 41 million people. So, at any rate, to sum up, we're looking now at 2016. We have got to find a way to counteract these 6 swing states with their Republican governors and their Republican secretaries of state. We've got to deal with 80% of the public voting on 10-year-old computer machines. And we have to figure out how we're going to restore the vote, the right to vote, to tens of millions of African Americans, Hispanics, young people, elderly, and the like. And that's the challenge we face if we're going to have anything even vaguely resembling a democracy. And you have to picture yourself on election eve. Let's say that we're successful with Greg's material. We restore enough people to the vote. We actually win. And you got to remember one thing. This is a reality. There's no Republican Party anymore. I mean, there's a few Tea Party people out there. They have a constituency against, limp old men. But the demographics of the country have really shifted against the Republican Party. This is the last gasp, and it's an electronic gasp of the Republican Party. They cannot win an election, and it's certainly not a national election, given the basis of the demographics and the true genius of their campaign, of the candidates they have to choose from, ranging from Donald Trump on up. But the reality is that if we don't deal with this, what we're going to look at on election night is we're going to have 6 governors and 6 secretaries of state sitting in the key state capitals. And they're going to look at the election and say, boy, we really got our butts kicked, didn't we? Right? And they're going to turn to their IT person. And they're going to tell their IT person, look, we can't have this. How long will it take you to change it? And will you get caught? And the IT person says, I'll never get caught, and it'll take me 10 seconds. And that's the reality we're looking at. So Greg is going to fill in a little more. The new book will be, and we are also funding, we're going to fund, part of the book will be a campaign in Ohio. We're going to develop a template over the next couple of months so that everybody in every state is going to be able to deal with this going into 2016. And that's the reason we talk about this, and we need to pull this off. So thank you very much for your time, Mimi. Thank you for setting this up.
You're
And
welcome.